I just think it's interesting, right? People have such a kind of perception of carnivore or this type of person, and there's so many like associations built in with that. And but yeah, I was just interested to hear, you know, what that transition was like.
Well, before that, you were vegan too, weren't you? Raw vegan.
Many years ago. So I was vegan. So before I went to medical school, I was a physician assistant working in cardiology, and in PA school, which was a master's degree from George Washington University in DC, they didn't teach us any nutrition. And so the beginning of my nutritional experimentation was, let's learn about a vegan diet, and I think a vegan diet's the way to go. And I lost 20 pounds of muscle mass. I was so skinny, and I had horrible gas. So the vegan diet didn't work for me, but man, I tried it. I was a raw vegan for about 6 or 7 months. Lost multiple dates because of that. Like, girls wouldn't go out with me. I was so skinny. No good.
Was it for the gas or the skinniness? Or both?
It was both. It was both, actually. Like, I mean, if I walked into a room with people and I had to be indoors for a while, I just hoped that there was a couch with squishy cushions that I could like fart into for a while, and then I would stand up real quick and just leave the room so nobody would know. Or like a movie theater was good if they had the squishy seats, because I just had so much gas, like I couldn't be in a closed space with people. And
Wow.
this was 7 months. It wasn't that my gut needed time to adjust. It was just, I mean, I was raw vegan, but you know, sometimes plant-based folks, I'm friends with some of them, will say, oh, your body needs to adjust to more fiber. And it didn't work for my gut at all. And it was pretty bad. It's so nice now just to be able to go on a date or hang out with friends in a room that doesn't have all the windows open and just know that I'm not going to fart all the time.
That's amazing. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I got a quick question.
Yeah.
We're jumping around a bit, but you mentioned athletes. So for guys like us that might need a higher carb intake, and yourself as well, are there any foods that you recommend that maybe aren't on your A list, but that we can include, that we can feel okay about to keep, you know, refueling our system before performance and after?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think when it comes to carbohydrates, it's a really interesting conversation. And this is the way I see it. I think there are carbohydrates that are basically good, better, best. So we can start with best and then better and then good and go backwards. But I think that, like you said, the more activity you do and the more intense that activity is, the more carbohydrates you need. But I do believe that most humans, even if they're pseudo-sedentary, are going to benefit from some amount of carbohydrates. Maybe a small amount of carbohydrates. It doesn't have to be a ton, but some amount of carbohydrates I feel like benefit everyone. Maybe I would say, just for most people as a rule, at least 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. Scaled up to maybe on the top end, 400 plus for you guys. I mean, if you're doing 3, 4, 5 hours of sparring, rolling, wrestling, you're going to need 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, unquestionably. And there's great research to show that when you have more carbohydrates in your diet, you recover better from exercise. Post-exercise, post-exertional cortisol, which is a stress hormone in that context, is lower. Testosterone to cortisol ratio is better in athletes that have more carbohydrates. This is kind of where the old school thinking of just eating tons of pasta comes from. But when it comes to carbohydrates, I think pasta is probably one of the worst types of carbohydrates, and I'll talk about why. So with someone that needs 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates, it's pretty hard to get that from fruit and fruit juice and honey, unless you're doing lots and lots of meal prep. But that's where I get the majority of my carbohydrates from. That's just what works best for me. Fruit and fruit sugar is getting a bad rap these days, and we can talk about why that's completely false and doesn't need to be worried about at all. But the sugar in fruit is in a whole foods package. The sugar even in fruit juice, if you're juicing it yourself and it's not just like Tropicana juice on the grocery store aisle, is totally safe and healthy for humans because it comes packaged in this juice matrix that your body recognizes and doesn't have any of the negative effects of processed sugar in your body. So the first thing for people to understand is that sugar, which is sucrose, it's a disaccharide of glucose and fructose, performs very differently in the human body when it's in a food form. Even if it's a juice form, your body still sees it as food. The fiber's been removed, but not all of it, and your body still sees it as food because it has so many vitamins and cofactors with it. So you don't need to fear honey, you don't need to fear maple syrup, you don't need to fear fruit or fruit juice. When you're getting up into like 300 to 400 calories a day or 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, you're gonna need something else probably. And in terms of that, like the better realm of carbohydrates, most people do sweet potatoes or white rice. maybe even a white potato, depending how you tolerate it. So now you need to just keep in mind, there's all these asterisks here, and this is probably where working with somebody good, like a chef or nutritionist, can help you kind of navigate this. White potatoes are a nightshade. So some people get autoimmune issues with white potatoes. Nightshades tend to cause issues for people, not everyone, but like tomatoes, goji berries, wolfberries or gooseberries are nightshades. You get eggplants. A lot of these foods are nightshades. So some people can tolerate it. Some people just have immune reactions. And it's just something to know that if you are having gut issues or you have a rash that kind of comes and goes, there's something triggering your immune system. And it's important to try and figure out what that is, because you'll be so much better long-term if you don't have that chronic low-level immune activation, which is also known as inflammation going on in your body, related to a food which may not be super processed, but just isn't working with your genetics. So white rice, pretty benign for most people. There are some caveats in terms of how you prepare the white rice, because even white rice is pretty high in heavy metals, or can be. Brown rice is particularly high in heavy metals like arsenic. So brown rice, we've been told traditionally, is a health food, but I think white rice is a healthier carbohydrate for athletes. Stripping off the hull removes a lot of the heavy metals, but you still need to process it in a certain way. A lot of people end up with sweet potatoes. So those are kind of the middle foods. And then the worst carbohydrate sources, I would say, would be other grains beyond that. And this is something that's controversial that I talk about, but I don't think oatmeal is a great carbohydrate for a lot of people for reasons we can talk about. I don't think wheat is a great carbohydrate for people for a lot of the reasons that we talked about, or I can talk about. So limiting the grain-based carbohydrates and focusing on fruit, honey, and then maybe tubers is probably the first step. Maybe white rice from there, and then being careful with the grain-based carbohydrates, because they carry a lot of anti-nutrients. So I'll just talk about this for a moment and then let you guys ask follow-up questions. You think about grains, you have wheat, oats, rice is included there. They're all seeds. If you plant wheat in the ground, it grows into a wheat plant. If you plant an oat before it's smashed into a rolled oat, it grows into an oat plant. So the seeds of plants do have defense chemicals, and they do contain things like phytic acid, which is a large molecule that chelates minerals and prevents their absorption. So the problem I have with oatmeal is there are multiple problems, but one of the problems is that it's really high in phytic acid, and it's really hard to break that compound down, the phytic acid. So if you are eating oatmeal with milk, you're not going to absorb most of the calcium in the milk because the phytic acid in the oats is going to bind it. If you're eating oatmeal with a steak, you're not going to absorb the zinc in the steak because the phytic acid in the oats is going to bind it and pull it out of your body. Tubers don't have the same problem. Fruit doesn't really have the same problem. They don't have as much phytic acid. Oats are also problematic because of something called saponins, which can damage the gut. So seeds are just defended. These grains, particularly, defense chemicals that cause digestive issues and kind of rob us of minerals. So that's my issue with those, because you want, as an athlete, or even as any human that's like somebody that's working in a 9-to-5 and wants to go to the gym 3 days a week, you want your minerals. You want to absorb the nutrients from your food. You don't want those going out in your poop and your pee because you're eating anti-nutrients in your carbohydrates. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah. It makes a ton of sense. That just kind of, I like I said at the beginning, I've been following you for a while, and I think a lot of what you've said nutritionally makes a ton of sense. Like that clip, check out the whole podcast here, and make sure to hit that subscribe button.